I watched a bit more than I thought I would, but definitely not as much as last season. Most of them were returning or continuing series though. I'll try to keep spoilers to a minimum, and I'll put a warning if it's fairly large. That's about it. Also, please remember to watch the 2 new 86 episodes, because holy fuck, especially the second to last one definitely bumped it up to 9 out of 10 for me. I believe that the ultimate goal of Platinum End was something that many other shows or stories in general don't really do, and that was to create the 2 most boring characters ever imagined while simultaneously having a hidden implication that maybe people who are suicidal are justified in their thinking. First, let's start with the characters. Fuck, I don't know how to analyze characters I couldn't stand listening to. It's gonna be kinda hard. They wanted to live and they wanted to be happy. Kakahashi doesn't want to kill people because that would prevent them from obtaining their own happiness, and Saki just kinda goes along with it. The biggest problem is that if there was a situation where his life was in danger, he would just kinda stumble around and be like, I can't kill them, and then just wait until something happens or someone else kills them. When they weren't fighting though, it's incredible just how much you can shove down the throat of your audience the theme of the show. Everybody wants to be happy. Wow, what a fucking revelation. There was nothing else to them. They sounded boring, they looked boring. Why are his lips always chapped? I don't know. This review is a bit all over the place because I don't know how to make sense of something that didn't. I also said that there may be a hidden implication that suicide is alright. I believe the end tried to have a message similar to The Good Place, that life is valuable because we only have so much time on Earth, and if that time on Earth were unlimited, at some point it's possible that there would be no incentive to keep living. The only problem is that it takes suicide really lightly throughout the show. I mean, at one point they just say, we should make suicide a good thing, and someone responds, yeah, you're right. I could not believe it or begin to understand where they're coming from or why. That combined with a very glorified scene about how everybody desires death and this character that just casually talks about suicide and more just made this a shit show in every way you can take it. It gets a 2 out of 10 because at some points I found myself bopping to the soundtrack and it gave me quite a few laughs. I genuinely can't believe this is made by the same person who made Death Note. Just shows that some works just work and others don't. Here's a comprehensive graph of the quality that Ranking of Kings would bring each episode. The first Cour was amazing. Each episode was pretty well animated with little developments into the world and characters that were so endearing and easy to connect to. There's a 3-headed snake with one of the heads chopped off, there was a dancing something that taught Boji a little jig, the little shadow Kage that could understand Boji no matter what, giants, magical mirrors, ogres, and I don't even know dude. There was a 5-minute scene of the making of a single drink. First, they grinded up the dead king, poured his sludge into a sphere. The sphere was then raised above a large bowl of water into this dome where light would hit it from all sides. Once it was heated up enough, the sphere was dropped into the bowl. It cooled and cracked to reveal an egg. The egg then birthed a phoenix. The phoenix grew to an adult size. Its head was cut off and its blood was poured into a wine glass. The body was then incinerated to obtain some gemstone hidden within the body and plopped into Daida's cup. The amount of detail put into the world was staggering. It didn't need to be like this, and that's what I liked so much about the world. The detail made it more and more interesting that I couldn't not want to watch it. Some of the art may be off-putting, but trust me, the animation is for the most part amazing and the art style itself quickly grows on you. Each character is in their own way lovable and amazing. Kage has a splintered past with humans, taking his homeland and taking advantage of his kindness that it's not until he meets the somewhat naive but completely selfless Boji does he have a change of heart. They're an inseparable pair that I couldn't stand to see away from each other. Boji himself is the epitome of a seemingly weak person. His mother and Boji's stepmother wants to make Daida the king to have a stronger and more respectable successor to the throne, but in doing so that would trample Boji as the rightful heir, and as she recalls old memories of her trying to connect with him, she realizes that she needs to give him some leeway to pursue what he wants, even if it's dangerous, and there's so much to the show that I love. There's a slight drop off around the start of the second Cour due to some poor pacing and kinda stale fights, but after that it climbs back to the greatness it was before and it slowly peaks over what it was. Episode 21 is incredible and one of the best episodes I'll ever watch. The music is great, the animation is great, the style is great, the story is great. I love it. I barely even talked about half of what was in the show, but I hope it's enough to give it a shot. I love it. 9.5 out of 10. Oh, I loved both openings, but man, the animation for the second one goes so hard, so I think that one edges it out for me. I like this show probably more than I should have. It's animated very well, looks very charming, has a cute girl who's quite possibly, and I'm saying this so I can look at this in 10 years and cringe, the closest thing to a waifu I'll ever have. She's confident and outgoing, hot and not afraid to show it, big weeb, and has a hint of thought into her. She remembers the little things that Gojo says, she talks to him about how her friends care for her, but not really about what she likes, and gave some sound advice to Gojo in the first episode. All that combined with cute expressions to go with the moments when she's around Gojo just made for an easily likable character while still being interesting enough to feel unique. Plus, she's hot. Now this guy on the other hand, he's not bad per se, but he gets a bag of mixed feelings for me. There seems to be something about an isolated quiet boy meets cute girl in the anime that I'm not really sure about. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing because considering the examples I give on screen are fairly different and really do try to separate themselves, but this guy seems more typical and leaning towards a cliche than most. He's very polite and passive, he has a passion that he's too shy to really talk about or express his joy with other than his grandpa, and prior to Marine, he literally has no friends. Not one, and not because he's seen as bad or weird, but because he just didn't talk to anybody because he thinks he's weird. I don't think it gets any more secluded than that. But seeing him start to climb over those insecurities is what I liked about him. Ever since having a slightly harsh past with some random girl about him being into dolls, it's nice to see him overcome that, especially with both her and the art form he enjoys. I don't necessarily know if having that type of interaction would mold such a hermit, but here we are. Speaking of the art form though, part of the reason I thought I would enjoy this show is because I like the idea of dressing up a cute girl in different cosplay. But what was even more interesting is how rich the world of cosplaying is. I always thought there were a lot of details that went into it, but not this many and not so many that were actually accounted for. The slight difference in the color of a wig, tape to reshape the eyes, B-cups, yeah. I typically enjoy it when an author can incorporate interests of their own into a story. It's part of why Blue Period and Ocean no Ko are some of my favorites right now, so that was a big plus. The soundtrack was something like out of Persona 5, very smooth and relaxed, but not super jazz, if that makes sense. The animation for the show is actually really good. They animated the magical girl show fairly well, which is pretty wild, and effort like that shouldn't go unnoticed. What also could not go unnoticed was the amount of fan service. Now, I don't have much of a problem with it, especially since I knew what I was getting into. My biggest problem with it though, and part of what made Gojo really annoying, was his reactions to it. I can sort of get it the first time, it's a little off-putting and you don't know what she's like, and he's shy, doesn't want to be rude, but you'd think after like the 5th time he would realize that she really doesn't care. For a character that's been able to read and relate to some other characters throughout the show, you'd think like, oh yeah, this is just her, instead of spitting at a door when teased with the possibility of seeing her naked. It's a very enjoyable show, there's nice dialogue between the two, it's funny, it's cute, and it's worth a watch. I'm going back and forth between 7.5 and an 8 out of 10, so around there. I called this a possible hidden gem when looking at the trailers last season, and I don't think it was a gem, but it wasn't completely trash. Also, I don't know how hidden it was since it was fairly popular by the time it aired. It built up a pretty cool world where everything seems to revolve around mushrooms and some animal. There was a big floating toe worm that was kinda cool, hippopotamuses were used as military vehicles, big crabs, floating pufferfish, all of it was pretty neat and had its own flair to it. There was a fun dynamic between the duo that was hard not to like. I don't think they were amazing by any means. If they had some more depth to them, then they would probably be better, but they mostly talked about how they're going out to save what they love and the situation at hand. Actually, if any of the characters had a bit more depth, it would probably elevate the show just that much more. The animation could also use some work. There are some quick scenes that looked kinda good, but there were others that looked less than stellar, and if it had been more fluid, then it easily would have been a much more solid show, especially since the rest of it was fairly decent. The music went hard, the pacing was pretty good, a slightly slow first episode that flowed into some action that cooled down into some action and cooled down, and it did it consistently throughout the show. This did come at the cost of some things just happening. For example, there's a scene where Milo sets out to do something and it's played out like it's going to be this big mission, and then he's just at his goal. Another similar scene happens with Bisco almost immediately after it. It kept it going, that's for sure, but it definitely felt like some scenes were skipped. I originally had a little blurb with spoilers about what was happening towards the end because I was a bit lost, but then the most recent episode came out and I don't think we're supposed to know what's happening. It's kind of a shit show, which is a bit disappointing, but hey, I still had some fun with it. It's just not something to take as seriously as I would have liked to. They also played a little bit with time in the first few episodes, which added a bit to the direction, but not anything groundbreaking. I'm going to give this a 6.5 out of 10. Also, Milo singing by himself at the end was by far the saddest thing this season. I love Natsuki Hane. I don't think there's much to say about this one. It's pretty, but it felt like that was the only draw. Look at the show, look at it. It's cute and fun and bubbly and good looking. Even the background characters seem to stand out just as much as the main few. That's kind of it. The whole slice of life bit didn't appeal that much to me. It seemed like it wanted to create fairly simple characters that brought such a cute and mostly charming atmosphere to an almost overwhelming degree. Comparing this to something like Aquatope, there didn't seem to be any thematic overlay of the show, but rather highlighting all the little uplifting interactions typically between Akechi and everyone else. Akechi. I have no qualms with this show, really, and for the most part, I enjoyed it. I really liked the opening, and watching it weekly made it a pleasant way to pass about 20 minutes, but I don't think it's really my thing. I would like to see some hints of interesting character development for slice of life shows like these, but I could see some people being really into this, so if it looks like it's for you, give it a shot. 6 out of 10. Also, there were way too many shots of these girls' feet. Like, what the fuck? Please go back to the thighs, for the love of God. And they're like middle schoolers too. Jesus Christ, no. It's Dan Schneider's dream. The closest thing I've watched to a BL is Banana Fish, and I really enjoyed that show, so I thought that maybe I should give this a shot since it seemed like the manga was fairly popular, especially for something of this genre, and it was pretty good. There seemed to be many references or tropes done in BL that didn't land that much with me because I haven't read or watched any to see those tropes. Considering this, I learned a lot of new words. The most important part about having a story centered around romance is that it feels genuine, and it for the most part succeeded. There's a very, I would almost say, idealistic air to the show about love, but that kind of makes sense since it's high school and this seems like their first love, so of course it would be the idealistic. The pacing of the romance works really well. Sasaki isn't a bitch, so he's not stuck in a rent-a-girlfriend loop, which means he actually confesses at some point, but that's not before he has interactions to actually build up some sense of connection with the characters and motivation for him to do so. Miyano, on the other hand, doesn't really know how he feels, and it's not really because he doesn't know whether or not he likes Sasaki, it's because he doesn't know whether or not he's gay. I'm unsure how common a dilemma this is, but I'm sure it happens, and I recently watched a different show that portrayed a similar concept except different genders. He takes a lot of time to think about it, and even though in my notes I wrote that I want him to think faster, that's probably a bad idea because things are complicated. It's hard to both completely recognize and accept what you feel. That process in Sasaki's ability to wait is what made me respect the characters much more than the average romance. Now, I don't have any background in this type of situation, so it's possible that someone who has been could weigh in and completely negate what the show is trying to develop, but I highly doubt it. Besides the main two characters and their cute interactions, the animation works well, and there's this peaceful charm to the background and jumble of shapes that flow across the screen. I'm not really sure what they were for or why they worked, but each time a background appeared with a different assortment of whatever was there, it conveyed the mood well and made it more interesting to watch than a simple solid color or background of whatever setting they were in. Overall, this is a good watch, and if you haven't watched something like this, maybe give it a shot when you can. 8 out of 10. This was cool. Good animation, good direction, and maybe a bit more of a boost to the soundtrack could have helped, but overall a solid experience. I think I still like the Mugen Train a bit more, even if the pacing of the first half was a bit off, because in a battle of spectacle you really can't beat Ufotable. There's a certain quality to those animations that I just can't quite grasp what makes them so great, because what I saw on screen for JJK0 seems like it should have been just as impressive, but I just don't think it was. Again, it's good, very good, much better than most, but there's some missing quality that I need to figure out. As for the actual story, it works. I won't say it's amazing, but giving more background to Yuta is a nice touch. It makes him more interesting and engaging as a character in the manga, which I'm also caught up on. The basic summary is that someone close to him dies, cursed shenanigans happen, and now he's stuck with a cursed version of that person and needs to unravel it. Along the way, he grows with the other Jujutsu High students and racist stuff happens. I won't spoil too much of it. I really liked Maki's role in this. She both helped Yuta overcome what was ailing him, but there's also little conversations to show she's always been willing to bear her past with her clan while still wanting to prove to them that she should be at the top. That mixed in with her own personal zest made her fun to watch. Besides her and Yuta though, no one's presence stood out to me in this movie. It might be different if you hadn't read the manga, like why is this person so racist, how do Gojo and this guy know each other, where's this guy Stitches? That's all I can think of off the top of my head, but I'm sure there's more. There's a bit of a trade-off with the fights, I think. This is going off of a one-time viewing of this, so if I don't get everything right, forgive me. I'll probably watch it again when it releases on streaming services, and I'll update it in the description if I find I'm wrong. The first half of the Demon Slayer movie was pretty slow, filled with little fighting and kind of boring, especially if you don't like the humor. This was compensated by having a free-for-all spectacle animation at the end. The fights in JJK0 felt much more interspersed, yet not as long. I might even go out on a limb and say that there was more fighting in JJK0, but not as much of it was as memorable since it felt like only a few of the fights went on for a sustainable amount of time without some type of interruption. I'm not really sure which is better. I still think I prefer Demon Slayer due to the animation, but it's possible having a great battle that felt like forever all at the end was also partly responsible. Comedy was okay, nothing atrocious, but not as funny as the first season. I'll give this a 7.5 out of 10. Give it a watch. You know, it's a really cool fight. Like, there's a lot of flying sparks. It's basically like two fireworks fighting each other. All I have to say is my statements only get truer with time. The first step was fairly slow, not much happened, and I didn't really care for it, but it was only a few episodes, so it's not like it hindered the show that much. Comedy was fine, I'm never really busting a gut, and they kind of have this feel of adults putting on some sort of act for children, but I'm somehow never really cringing, or at the very least it never made me want to stop watching the show. Part of it could be because some bits are ironically funny, like Uzuri slapping this girl's ass for literally no reason, Daki's voice actress this guy coughing for way too long, or Zenitsu's voice actor every time absurdly yelling Tanjiro. When it got to the animation, it was good. I think making the scarf or whatever the fuck this is the primary weapon for was kind of lame. Obviously they're just adapting what the manga contained, but it never had the same oomph as two close combat items. Especially these, they just look sick. It kind of makes me wish the mangaka knew that someone like Ufotable would be animating this so they could just focus almost entirely on fighting. Could you imagine what it would be like if there were like 4 straight chapters of pure fighting with barely any dialogue to adapt? God, that'd be so cool. Another reason I bring up that very unrealistic scenario is just because of how much talking there was with the demons. And I mean, I wouldn't be too mad, but Jesus Christ, this bitch was so annoying, it's ridiculous, and this guy seemed to string along sentences longer than my dick. And I'll have you know, my dick is long, okay? It's long, it's a long dick. It's a big dick, it's a long dick, okay? It's long, okay? Okay, so now that we have that cleared up, coming back around to it, I just think that having these long, drawn-out conversations about pretty much nothing meaningful in the show where the stellar animation is a selling point is something to avoid. Speaking of the animation, it was really fucking good. As I stated previously, this show is like watching fireworks fight each other. I mentioned this before to my friend, but I kind of feel bad because even some of the really good fight sequences that were like maybe a 7 out of 10 for the show would be at least a 9 out of 10 in any other anime. And on top of that, I don't know what they'll do to top themselves. Even if I like Mugen Train more, I have to admit the season definitely had the better animation, but whatever comes next can't be as good, right? I guess we'll have to find out. To add just a bit more, I love the voice acting from pretty much everyone, but especially Uzui. It seems like the Hashira tend to have a compelling flair that just grabs me. At the end of episode 10, I was ready for shit to hit the fan when he said run. I loved it. There also wasn't much more of a plot than there was anywhere else in the series. It's a fun series, not a deep one. Everything works for tension to be made and then for the heroes to make it out. Or most of them at least. All in all, a good experience. I would probably watch it again. 8.5 out of 10. Oh, and I guess Nezuko can have tits now. I don't really know what to say about that. I think I would care if anime weren't drenched in over-sexualized minors, but since it is, I don't have it in me to give a shit. Sorry, is that the right thing to say? Who knows? The first arc of this part was pretty wild. Presentation and animation in general was better and added to one of the biggest strengths of the show, its atmosphere. The soundtrack, the setting, the character designs all combined form a very defined environment, which is nice to appreciate. Some of the characters took a leap forward to be more interesting, and the new ones introduced were heartfelt, albeit nothing new. It's at this point that I should probably be honest and say that I'm not watching this as actively as other shows. I don't know why, but I tend to get the details muddled whenever I watch this show, and that's probably more of a sign that I find this an entertaining way to pass the time, which is good, but also means I don't understand everything. What's with this reactor? How did it work? What's happening with this guy? Is he still relevant? What about Noe drinking that tea? Maybe it'll be relevant later, in which case that's good and a fault of my own, but I would need a rewatch in order to say that I'm totally on board with it. The Vanitas backstory arc is interesting so far, and I did very much enjoy what's been happening on screen, so I'll give it an 8 out of 10. Also, the opening bops, couldn't say why. Attack on Titan was my first anime and quite possibly my favorite ever, so to still see such a consistently well-written, well-directed, and tense series after all this time is something that I don't know if I can properly express, and I don't even know if I want to, considering that many people have voiced similar opinions of mine about this legendary part. The animation is much better than the first part, and this is mostly based on how many times I thought the first part would have been better if Wit animated it, but that was not nearly as recurring in this part. Ashes on Fire is back with a new brother called Footsteps of Doom. There are still twists, wild shots, character developments. I don't think I can review this properly without spoilers and me divulging every little detail I saw on screen. So I'm just gonna give it a 10 out of 10 to keep it brief. I should also say that I'm not caught up with the manga, and of course I've heard the screeches of the many or maybe just loud minority of people who did not like the ending and thought that it ruined the whole thing. I'm not ecstatic about it, but I'm not so worried as to what happens. I'm more concerned with whether or not what's to come will somehow ruin what came before it. I don't think it can, but I don't want to jinx myself. I can only wait and find out, but here's to hoping I don't have to change this score. That's it. Don't have much to say about this season. Pretty solid for new shows, really good for returning ones. Can't wait for the next one, which is basically the season of rom-coms. See ya.